Hello folks, hope everyone's doing well, having a good day, and welcome back to Canada's boxing channel. Now today there isn't any really big fights happening, so I thought it'd be an opportunity to upload another one of our historical look-backs or career retrospectives of some of the great champions of the past. And we're working our way through the heavyweight division. One of the fellows that I've not spoken about so far, and frankly, I wasn't going to do a video on this fellow, is Primo Carnera. Now, the reason I wasn't going to do a video on Primo Carnera is I think it's pretty much well understood that Primo Carnera's record has to be viewed skeptically because of his, quite frankly, being owned by mobsters. In particular, the aptly named Owney Madden. But it came to my attention the other day that not everybody is so familiar with how Owney Madden owned Primo Carnera. As I was talking with somebody the other day who pointed out that Primo Carnera has an excellent record, an excellent knockout ratio, and I don't think that they realize that many of these fights were fixed. And so I thought, let's just talk about Primo Carnera. Because on its face, he does have a spectacular record. And he was a giant. He was an absolute colossus of a man, built, in the temple of the gods, right? He stood 6'6". He was the second tallest heavyweight champion at that time. Jess Willard had been a bit taller, 6'7". But Primo Carnera he was a huge man. He's 275, 6'6". Average height in the United States of America at the time Primo Carnera was boxing was 5'7". So put that in perspective. Average height in Italy, where he came from, was 5'5". So this man's 6.5 feet tall. He's absolutely huge, right? But he was a man who was used, manipulated, and sadly, ultimately discarded by the people who were controlling him. Excuse me. He was born on October the 26th, 1906 in Italy, in a small town near the Austrian border. Life was hard. Poverty was very normal. He worked as a laborer, a carpenter, and a circus strongman before discovering his path to fame, which was boxing. And by the late 1920s, Primo Carnera was fighting professionally in Europe. He was an okay fighter. He was not a man completely without skills. He was a very, very large, powerful man. And, if he hits you, you knew all about it, right? He arrived in the United States in 1930, and that's when things took a real turn for the worse. Because his immense size made him an instant attraction. But it wasn't just fight promoters who were interested. Like I said, Owney Madden, notorious New York mobster who'd done time, owned the Cotton Club, and lots of friends with Bugsy Siegel and people like that. So Owney Madden saw an opportunity. Carnera was big, slow, and controllable. He had a manager who was easily threatenable. Therefore, he was the perfect puppet. So this is where it gets really ugly. We don't know how many of his fights were fixed. It's believed that many of his fights were actually corrupted. People were paid or threatened to lose. And so Primo Carnera is winning fight after fight after fight, and not always because of skill. I must emphasize that he wasn't a completely unskilled person, but Did he really beat George Godfrey, Bearcat Wright, George Cook, Pat McCarthy? You know, we don't know, right? All these folks are passed on. No one's going to be talking about it now. But anyhow, the mob clearly, were well in control of Primo Carnera. The manager he came to America with had been controlled, and eventually, on June the 29th, 1933, Primo Carnera gets a shot at the world heavyweight title, the richest prize in sport. Everybody knew who the world heavyweight champion was. It's a license to print money. He fought Jack Sharkey in Long Island City. And in the 6th round, Primo Carnera caught Sharkey with an absolutely brutal uppercut, sending him to the ground. Sharkey had this to say: "I got hit and never knew what hit me." Rumors, however, still lingered because many people believed that Sharkey had been paid to lose. We don't know, but it seems likely. However, regardless, Carnera was now the world champion. He's the first Italian-born fighter to wear the crown. Italy rejoices. Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy, lauds Primo Carnera as a national hero. But in the United States of America, the whispers of corruption continued. So he defended his title after beating Jack Sharkey. He defended his title in Rome, and then he defended his title in Madison Square Garden against Tommy Loughran. Tommy Loughran, a capable fighter. But then, in his 85th fight, he faces a real killer, Max Baer. Now, Max Baer had killed a person in the ring. Max Baer had also given another person an absolute beating, who then went on to fight Primo Carnera and died after his fight with Primo Carnera. But people were still thinking, oh, this was Max Baer's work. We've talked about Max Baer on this channel before. Max Baer was a real, legitimate, elite level heavyweight champion. He was also a very real and very devastating puncher. And he wasn't playing by the mob's rules. Baer knocked Carnera down 11 times over 11 rounds. One of the most savage, one-sided beat downs in boxing history. Max Baer famously said, "I didn't want to kill him, but I had to hit him to stop him from coming forward." There is no doubt that Primo Carnera was a very courageous fighter who did not know that many of the people he had beaten because the fights were fixed. That's the sad thing about Primo Carnera. He didn't know. He was a real innocent. He really believed that he was the best in the world. A very simple fellow. However, after his loss to Max Baer, Carnera's aura of invincibility, well, that was kind of shattered for good. The myth really was over. Now, Carnera didn't quit. He went off. He had a win in Argentina. He had a win in Brazil. He had another win in Brazil. He had another win back in Madison Square Garden. So he had 4 wins on the bounce. Points, KO, KO, TKO. Were those fixed? Probably not. Lower level opposition. He steps into the ring with Joe Louis. Yankee Stadium at the Bronx. Well, generally speaking, when you meet legends, you lose. And lose he did. Joe Louis dropped Carnera repeatedly before finishing him off in the 6th round. And from that point on, Primo Carnera was no longer really a contender. His body was breaking down, his career was slipping away, and he had no money. Why did he have no money? Owney Madden, Bugsy Siegel, they kept the money. Primo Carnera got the square root of Fanny Adams. Poor Primo. Anyhow, Primo carried on fighting. He had another 4 wins after his loss to Joe Louis. Then he had 3 losses, then a few wins, and then he had 3 losses on the bounce. And he eventually retired from boxing on the 19th of May, 1946. His professional record, 103 fights, 89 wins, 14 losses. Of his 89 wins, he won 72 by the way of knockout. And so that's why people look at his record and think, oh wow, this guy was devastating. However, that's not where the Primo Carnera story ends. After World War II, and after having health issues, Carnera transitioned to professional wrestling. And he was helped by none other than Max Baer. Max Baer stepped in where the mob had abused Carnera and abandoned him. Max Baer stepped in and said, look, I beat you, but I want to help you. And Max Baer helped him become a professional wrestler, where he was really, really, really good. The world of pro wrestling suited Primo Carnera. Choreographed matches, adoring fans, no danger of running into another Max Baer. And he became a huge fan favorite in the US, in Canada, and in Europe. He was billed as the ambling Alp, or the world's largest athlete. He was Andre the Giant before Andre the Giant. And he wrestled into his 50s and finally had some control over his image and, most importantly, over his income. He was eternally grateful to Max Baer. And in fact, when Max Baer passed away, Primo Carnera flew back to the States. He wasn't able to attend the funeral. He missed the funeral, but he actually broke into the cemetery, climbed in a fence so that he could pay his respects to the gravesite of Max Baer, who had in many ways saved Primo Carnera. In his later years, Carnera returned to Italy. He'd battled a number of chronic ailments, diabetes, kidney issues, and even had a leg amputated, poor fellow. On June the 29th, 1967, so it's exactly 34 years after he won that world heavyweight title, Primo Carnera died, and he was only 60. I was never the smartest man in the ring, he once said, but I was always the one who got up. I think that's fair to say. Primo Carnera was a very courageous fellow. He'd been a pawn, he'd been a champion, and he was a showman. He clearly was not the greatest fighter, but there's a lot of positive things to be said about Primo Carnera. A real gentle man whose story is one of spectacle, scandal, the mob control, and survival. A fellow who I think deserves respect, and he also deserves a great deal of sympathy. And Max Baer's memory should be honored when thinking about Primo Carnera as well. That's all I've got on Primo Carnera at the moment. I strongly suggest you look him up. But bear in mind that much of what you might read about him is somewhat mocking, and they're sort of like almost people were laughing at him. I think it's important to look past that and look upon him as a very vulnerable fellow who did very well, fell into very, very rough hands, treated very poorly, but nevertheless came out good at the end. And yeah, let's not forget these great champions of the past. They fought in very difficult times under very different circumstances, that's for sure. Please like, please share, please subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.